Hey everybody. This slideshow is on basic typography. And it'll have two parts. So the question is what is typography? You know, when I was in college, we talked about typography being the study of fonts, but we got to know what a font is at that point. Um, Another definition is typography is what language looks like. And we see typography everywhere. The visual language is design as well, and we design type to reinforce the nuance of the concept or product which we are presenting to the public or to our audience. But typography is everywhere. It's on our phones, it's on packaging, all types of packaging. Some typefaces are designed strictly for a particular brand, like the Tropicana. They've modified a typeface and created it to fit their brand specifically. But at some point in time, we started communicating with pictures. These pictures were called pictographs. And at some point, people began communicating visually. They made simple drawings of things that existed in their world. This was the Phoenicians. And those things could be people, animals, tools, weapons, for example. And the Phoenicians created a form of written communication which evolved using symbols to represent the sounds of speech instead of just objects. Now, the southern side of the Mediterranean Sea was occupied by the Phoenicians' trade routes. So they used their condensed language for business, and thus that spread their alphabet. And the original Phoenician alphabet had no vowels. It read from right to left instead of left to right, which is something weird to think about. And also small letters indicated sounds. And then the Greeks eventually adopted their alphabet and added the 5 vowels. And you're more familiar with the Greek alphabet. And the Romans later modified the Greek alphabet to what is now our alphabet. However, the original Roman alphabet only had 23 letters instead of 26 letters. So to give you an idea of the ways that they modified the Greek alphabet over time, the C had the K sound in cat and the G sound in garden. So they invented the G by adding a bar to the C. The I had the I sound like in eye, and the Y sound in yellow. The V had the U sound like in put, and the sound somewhere between V and W. They originally used the Y and the Z when they wrote Greek words, so they replaced them at the end, or they placed them at the end. They borrowed the Y and the Z from the Greeks. The Y had a similar sound to the V. The Z always had the Z sound. The Anglo-Saxons used the Roman alphabet, but they did not have a symbol for the W sound at the time. It didn't exist in Latin. So they used a double rounded U, but then the rounded U sound and the V sound were represented by a V. So the U was 2 V's. So when people wanted the U, the rounded U sound, they just ended up eventually making the V with a rounded bottom. Since those were related, they placed them together in the alphabet. It wasn't until the 19th century when scholars accepted the J and the U as actual letters. But this is how our alphabet evolved over time. And all of this terminology is based on the first printing. You know, we had the uppercase, capital letters, or the caps of the alphabet, and we also had the small letters of the alphabet, often indicated as an LC, lowercase. And this diagram illustrates the parts of the letters or characters, including serif and sans serif letters. So the serif being the little notches on the letters. And depending on the typeface, and by the way, you need to know this terminology, so know what a counter or crossbar are. The X height is the height of the lowercase letter from the baseline. The baseline is that invisible line where all the letters rest. The mean line is the invisible line where the lowercase letters go. The bar of the letter is called the stem, and this part of the stem that goes below the baseline is called a descender, and the part of the stem that goes above the mean line is called an ascender. And then you have the bowl of the letters here, which can also be called a counter. That's the invisible space here. The crossbar is the bar that goes across. So depending on the typeface, the X height of the characters may be different, and the general size of the letters may differ. So this is good to keep in mind when you're placing and utilizing type in your layout. So Garamond is a fairly smaller typeface. Helvetica, on the other end, has a taller X height. So when we talk about typeface, we're talking about the entire collection of characters, letters, numerals, punctuation that all have the same distinct sign and may be named after the individual who designed it. Most of the time it's that way. So if we're looking at your control panel in InDesign across the top, the character or the typeface is going to be in the top left when you are in your type tool. Now the font, which is what most people call any typeface, we always just short term use the term font. But fonts are actually the variation of styles of a typeface. That includes like Roman, italic, thin, light, regular, bold, condensed, all of those things. Some typefaces have a few styles, font styles, some have a whole lot. So it just depends on the typeface that you're using. These are, a whole entire type family or a font family. Those are all the type styles of a font of one typeface. And so in your control panel, that's going to be underneath the name of the typeface. Now when we talk about the size of the font, usually that's going to be in points or picas, which are really just versions of units of an inch. These are based off the original printing plates used in a printing press. So it's good to know how points are created. So if we look at the size of the type in your control panel, it's going to be next to the right of the typeface, and it's going to be in points. And you can get to, fractions of a point here. So the diagram shows the top panel in InDesign where those tools can be adjusted. But 72 points equal an inch. 12 points equal 1 pica, and 6 picas equal 1 inch. And when we're talking about line spacing, we refer to that as leading. And it's pronounced leading, not leading in the design world. But leading always refers to line height. And that is also referring to the distance between baseline and baseline of the lines of type. So this will be important when you type your rationale for major projects. The rationale will include style sheets, which are the assignments in type, including size of the type, the leading or line spacing, and kerning. So the line spacing is going to be underneath the size of the type here. And in these three different examples, the top is going to be 18. The size of the type is 18 points, and the size of the leading is 18 points. And we usually refer to this as set solid. And when it's set solid like this, a lot of times you'll see descenders and ascenders will be perfectly distanced to where they would barely touch. Now, if we increase the leading by 6 points, we still have the same type size of 18 points, and we've added 6 points to the leading to make it 24, so we've loosened the leading a little bit. And a lot of times, especially if it's on web design or mobile design, it's good to have a few more points in the leading, so it's a little bit easier to read, especially if it's a compressed typeface in some way. The bottom example, we've tightened the leading. We still have the size at 18, but we've reduced the leading by 2 points to make it 16. You can usually tell when it's too tight. Your descenders and ascenders will overlap sometimes. Like if this descender of the P were to run into the L, the ascender of the L here, those would overlap. And that's when they do that, you know it's a little too tight. And a couple of other things that you may want to be aware of in your control panel is kerning and tracking. And they're very closely related. Kerning is going to be on the top here, and it's a little bit further right to some of the character formatting tools. But kerning is adjusting the space between two individual characters. Tracking is similar, but it's adjusting the space between characters of an entire word or a section.